Sensitivity and stress are two very different things. Sometimes people think that highly sensitive people are kind of neurotic, like they're like just too sensitive, too it's like they're crazy or something. But the reality is that sensitivity has nothing to do with stress. Nothing to do with stress. Sensitivity has to do with sensitivity, the ability to perceive things, the ability to experience subtle things. And when stress is involved, you're going to pick up on stress much earlier if you're a sensitive person. But it doesn't mean that stress isn't sitting there for everyone, whether they're highly sensitive or not. It just means that highly sensitive people are aware of it sooner. They're aware of it and they can't just ignore it. Some people have the ability to have a little bit of stress rumbling underneath the surface and just not pay much attention to it. They can just keep going on about their lives, and even just distraction is enough to deal with that, or to not deal with it in that case. So highly sensitive people don't have that option. When stress is there, we feel it strongly, and we have to do something about it. So people tend to label us as neurotic, highly sensitive, you're too sensitive, something's wrong with you, all these kinds of judgments, because the assumption is like, if you're that stressed, then must be something really major. There must be something really wrong with you. The good thing of being a highly sensitive person is that you do notice stress earlier. And because we don't have a choice but to deal with it, when we do deal with it, we have a very clean system on the inside. We have that potential. And luckily, there are very effective ways of dealing with stress that can allow us to actually manage it as it comes in so that it doesn't have to be as stressful. So I want you to envision a possibility here of being a highly sensitive person, but not being a stressed person. Being someone who can actually experience stress, a stressor in the environment, without getting triggered by it. That requires some kind of spiritual growth. That requires some kind of development on the inside that is independent of sensitivity. Everyone can do this. And that's really what this podcast is about. But I just want to clear the difference between sensitivity and, say, neurosis, for example. One is the result of stress, stressful thinking. The other is just a natural tendency, and it's independent of stress. We may think that protecting ourselves from stress is enough to handle stress. And to some degree, that is true. If you can just shelter yourself enough from all the things that stress you, then you will be able to stay in a very calm state, and life is good that way. And to some degree, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, why would I go out of my way to put myself in a stressful situation if I have the choice? The problem comes is that we can't always control our situations. And so life comes at us, people come at us, stressors come at us, and because we're highly sensitive, we can easily get overloaded quickly. And the problem is, if we're always trying to protect ourselves, our world becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, the things that we can actually do. And yes, we may be calm to a certain degree, but then there's a certain fear that is there even when you are protected of, oh my gosh, what happens if this protection comes down, and how am I going to handle it? So I like to say, don't just lighten the load, strengthen the horse. Become stronger in your ability to handle stress, and then less protection is needed so you can begin to expand your world. But also, when you're unable to protect yourself, you're able to handle stresses in a stronger way. So how does this work? It's always our interpretation of a situation that causes the experience of stress. It's not the stressor itself. It's certainly not the sensitivity. It's our thinking that is believing that something is wrong, that something is bad, something is terrible. And it might be somebody, the stressor might be somebody pointing the finger at us, blaming us for something. Now, that person is pointing at us, is angry, and is maybe using a loud tone of voice. And on the one hand, I might say that is what's causing my stress. But I challenge you to think, is that really what's causing it? In my experience, it's not the stressor, but what I'm thinking and believing about the stressor that's causing my experience of stress. So that means that if I take it personally, if I believe what they're saying and start buying into what they're saying, then suddenly now I've been caught by the same bug and I'm actually starting to go down very quickly. And so that's what's going to give me the experience of stress. But imagine this, if you were hearing that person blaming you, pointing at you and being angry at you, and you were not believing their story, we're not buying into it, and we're not interpreting it as you were a bad person or there was something wrong with you or anything like that. It would kind of be like watching some kind of silent film in a way. Like, okay, here's somebody, it's like Mount Vesuvius erupting and you see all this smoke and this fire and all kinds of things happening. But what does it have to do with me? Oh yeah, he's pointing at me, but what does it have to do with me? So this is that little bit of internal distance that can start to grow as you begin to question the thoughts that you're believing in any particular stressful moment. So I say that because that is the difference between being stressed and being sensitive. Sensitive notices things, pays attention to things, but stress or stressful thinking interprets those things, and that brings us over the flood level in a very quick manner. There are still physical limits, and it is still important to stay within those limits, respect those limits, as well as a highly sensitive person, because, there are physical limitations. But at the same time, if you can also begin to question your interpretations and your thoughts about situations, you'll find that your ability to tolerate stress in the environment just goes up through the roof. So this is what I call moving in the direction of inner freedom. Like true inner freedom is all about being independent from the environment. In other words, someone can be negative and I'm okay. Someone can be positive. I'm already okay. But I'm not dependent on the environment for me to be happy, for me to be peaceful. And if, due to my limitations as a highly sensitive person, I get overloaded, overwhelmed, then I take that in stride and retreat and take care of myself. So inner freedom means that no matter what happens, whether stressor happens, whether an overload happens within me, no matter what happens, it's okay. There's an evenness there. And that happens as I continue to question the thoughts that cause me stress. When you do that, there will be a natural separation of my world and the world that I live in that gives a freedom, gives a peace, and gives a stability. So I only bring this whole thing up because it's easy to fall into the idea that, oh, okay, I'm just by nature going to be stressed a lot. Not necessarily true. Just because you're a highly sensitive person does not mean that you have to be stressed all the time, because you have two ways of dealing with it. One, protect yourself from things, and two, work on your interpretation of things so that it actually doesn't have to get to you or doesn't get to you as quickly. The methods I use for this, very simple, always pretty much the same. Protection has many different avenues, and it can include taking breaks, giving yourself time, separating yourself from a situation. That kind of planning is very helpful. Being in nature, getting good rest, all of those things. Eating good food, not eating too much. All these things can help protect. But on the actual level of building resilience, meditation, and the work of Byron Katie. Those are the two methods that I find to be the most effective in working through the interpretations and seeing things in a different perspective.